To my dear friend who lives in the world next to mine, I hope this letter finds you awake and curious. I am typing at a quiet desk, and I want to tell you how life feels when a person can save and load their own days. We treat time like a careful craft here, and yet the craft has a cost. I will not explain rules at length, because rules are dull until a heart leans on them. Instead, I will tell you how my hands learned them and how my choices changed. The first time I saved, I was 19 and afraid of a small decision that felt like a cliff. I had 1 token that year, and I held it like a fragile glass bead. You can imagine what a token means, because it is the difference between a bruise and a lesson, and sometimes the difference between a life and a story. We all begin with a few tokens each year, and we may buy more, but price teaches caution better than lectures. A save is a quiet snapshot taken of a person and the room and the hour, and it remembers the breath you are about to take. A load is a return that feels like waking in a dream that obeys you. When you load, you keep your memory, and the world around you returns to the shape it had when the save was made, but only if the people near you agreed to be rewound with you. We call that consent, and we sign for it in advance with clear words and simple terms. Most of us keep a small agreement with our closest people, a promise that covers family emergencies and real danger. Lovers often write an agreement for one safe retry on a first date, and they disclose that fact with a smile that is honest and not slick. The law is plain and human, and it says that you cannot pull another person backward without their clear consent or a legal reason like a medical crisis. We learned this because early on, some people tried to fix heartbreaks by dragging time against the will of the other person. The courts carved a patient path, and the first lesson is simple: love is only love when it chooses, not when it is edited. I keep my tokens in a thin wallet card, and the card is unromantic, which I find reassuring. At work, we disclose loads that shaped results, because rehearsal is fine, but hidden advantages corrode trust. Imagine an engineer who saves before a presentation and reloads until every slide lands flat and perfect. Now imagine how that feels to the colleague who cannot afford extra practice tokens. To keep fairness, we have fresh sessions when no one is allowed to load, and we sign a one-line pledge that we will live that hour once. Those hours feel like sunrise on a cold day, sharp and honest. I like them because they remind me that a life should be more than a sequence of edits. Children do not save or load until 16 because their minds are still making roads, and loops would cut ruts too soon. On Sundays, many families hold a one-take meal, and that rule is simple: no saving today, no do-overs, just grace for small mistakes. With that rule, the soup may be too salty, and the laughter is better for it. I admit that I once burned bread and nearly cried, but I learned that burned bread can be a story instead of a stain. Sports in our world are careful about loads, because practice is one thing and a fair match is another. Professional leagues run fresh leagues with strong checks, and open leagues where loads are allowed in training but not during play. Spectators like both, because one shows the art of steady hands and the other shows the art of natural risk. Artists argue with themselves about loads too, and I understand them, because a song honed through 20 restarts can be clean and dull at the same time. A friend who writes essays keeps one vow: she gets one save at the outline and then none, which keeps her sentences alive. I think of that vow when I write you now, and I save only once today, at the point when I felt brave. There are people who load too often, and they fall into what we call bright ruts. A bright rut is the smoothest path to the smallest life, and it feels safe until you notice that nothing grows there. Therapists here help people step out of loops by caring more about meaning than about polish. If a patient says, "I can do it better if I try again," the therapist asks, "What do you want to learn if you live it once?" That question sounds like a small stone, but it can hold up a bridge. I keep a small notebook for lessons that I will not erase, and I read it when I fear a choice. My favorite entry says, This pain is tuition and not a tax. Pay it and pass through. A friend of mine works in hospitals, and she signs consent forms with patients for emergency saves before high-risk procedures. In that setting, a save feels like a seatbelt rather than a luxury, and the presence of it lets surgeons focus. Still, we must face odd moments, like the hour a patient lived and then did not, after a family chose a load to avoid harm that had just happened. The law creates a record for such erased moments, and we call the record a shadow claim, an entry that honors what was suffered in a branch that no longer stands. The words are heavy, but they are needed, because compassion should not vanish when an event does. There is a small museum that keeps art made in erased hours, and copies of that art hang in the living timeline, with a tag that says remembered from a path not taken. People linger there and feel a double ache, the ache of mercy and the ache of loss. Some citizens grow stern about loads and call themselves the one-take circle. They are not austere for the thrill of it, they simply believe that meaning must be won with one forward stride. I visit their talks sometimes, and I leave with less fear and more care. Money finds every new power, and tokens are no exception. Prices rise near storm seasons and big elections, and insurers bundle one emergency load for a decade into their most costly plans. I do not like the language of products when we talk about breath and time, but I accept it because we also buy warm coats, and the coats do good work. Fraud exists, of course, and teams of quiet auditors track suspicious bursts of success and elegant mistakes that repeat too neatly. Once a criminal used a dozen loads to learn a night guard's steps and then stepped past them like a dance, but the audit trail revealed the pattern, and the sentence was long. The guard received a shadow claim award that paid for his schooling, and he now writes speeches on fairness. Politics needed reforms, and we found them slowly. Candidates must declare fresh debates, when no loads are allowed for a number of hours before and after the event. The audience trusts those debates more, even when the answers wobble, because wobble can be honest. The other side of law is kindness, and I would rather show you that. My neighbor once saved before her father visited, because their history was full of small cuts that always reopened. She promised herself one load to avoid saying a certain hard sentence. When the visit came, she decided not to load, and she said the sentence once, with a slow breath. The sentence did not cut them the way it had cut them before, and a new kind of afternoon followed. I asked her later what changed, and she said, the choice to let it count. I hold that line like a candle on my busiest days. You may think all of this sounds neat and safe, but it is not so. Loads can tempt you to avoid grief, and grief is a form of love with its own labor and wisdom. Loads can tempt you to make shallow promises that you plan to erase if the cost runs high. Loads can also rescue a life from a drunk driver at midnight, and I will never argue against that rescue. The key is to treat tokens like fire, useful and dangerous, bright and demanding. We teach children using simple games, because children learn best by doing. One game lets them plan a day, and then revisit the plan without risky stakes, and in that way they learn the difference between practice and cheating. Another game shows how small changes have long arms, and that lesson grows patience. I want to tell you about love, because love is where the power of return is tested most deeply. I kept one save during a time when I thought I might say too much in a tender conversation. I told the person I loved that I had a save, and I asked for consent to load if my words landed wrong. The consent was given, but the consent came with a look that asked me to be brave. I spoke, and my voice shook, and my words were not polished. I could have loaded and tried again, but I felt that the tremble carried truth, and I left it in the world. That choice gave me a quiet calm I did not know I wanted, like taking off tight shoes after a long walk. We carry new rituals for partings now, because endings feel different when you can revisit. Some people hold a one-take goodbye, where no one is allowed a second try, and tears stand openly with dignity in the space. Other people hold a practice goodbye first, mostly to find the words and to bless silence. I have learned that practice is kind when it protects another, and unkind when it protects only my pride. You may wonder how art shifts when life can be revised. It shifts toward perfect surfaces unless we resist, and we resist by leaving seams where the human hand shows. There is a small theatre in my city where directors ban loads during rehearsal and allow one load the night before the first performance. The policy is not strict for the sake of strictness, it is strict so that the stage can feel alive. The plays there breathe like people do, with courage and a little mess. An old teacher told me invention demands friction, and friction is what a single try gives. Still, I am no purist, and I have seen a musician save before an improvisation and later load to explore a different pathway to the same melody, and that choice birthed a new school of music. The future of memory is another subject we debate with care. When you load, you alone remember both paths, and memory can grow heavy. Some minds carry the weight easily, and others bend, and others break if they are not guided. We do not shame those who bend, and we hold them up until they can stand. Counselors teach a simple question for heavy days: what do I keep and what do I set down? The act of choosing makes a single day manageable again. People in my city keep rituals to anchor themselves, because loads can make time feel slippery. One ritual is a candle at breakfast, and a note where you write one thing you will not erase. Another is a weekly walk without devices or tokens, a walk where conversation counts once and forever. There are quiet spiritual circles too, where people take vows of one try for a season, and they call those seasons harvests. I joined one once, and I learned to hear my own first words without rushing to fix them. My first words were clumsy and dear, and now I let them stand more often. For all my talk of care, you should also know the bright thrill that saving can give. Imagine learning a craft with patience, knowing you can step back from a bad cut while you still learn your grip. Imagine choosing a risky job interview with more courage, because you can rehearse once with a real heartbeat. Imagine traveling to a new city and daring to talk to strangers, because you have a single token set aside for safety. The thrill should not rule you, but it can help you take a healthy risk that would have scared you into staying small. This is how I think of loads now, as a brace for my legs, while I learn to walk a steeper hill. A brace is not a home, and the hill is not a reason to live, but a higher view can change what you try tomorrow. Let me tell you a story with ordinary edges, because ordinary edges are where meaning hides. A student in my building wanted to confess that he had cheated once, not on an exam but on himself by loading after a poor performance, and making the second performance perfect. He was ashamed because nobody knew, and the praise felt like sugar water. He saved one token to confess to his mentor, and he decided not to load no matter how the mentor reacted. The mentor listened and said, "Your talent is real, and now do real work that needs one try." The student sat on the steps outside and cried in a quiet way that did not look like defeat. He later started a club where people perform a small thing once, and the room cheers the mistakes that teach. I sometimes think our world built a power before we built the muscles to hold it. The years since then have been a kind of training, and training is boring until a person is stronger. I am stronger now in how I accept a single scar, and how I accept a single joy. The ledger of our lives is cleaner when we keep both. There are still people who chase perfect days and forget to have good ones. I do not judge them, but I try to make good days that can carry me without edits. You asked once if a load can change who a person is, in a deep way. The answer is yes and no, and I will say it clearly. Loads change the path, and the path changes the person, but the person also chooses which parts of themselves to bring forward. A load does not make courage for you, it only returns you to the place where you can try again. Courage is still yours to grow, and so is kindness. Our universities teach classes on rollback ethics, and most of the class is case stories, not abstract maps. Stories stick because they smell like real kitchens and real buses and real offices. I prefer stories over tidy systems, and maybe that is why I write to you in this way. A bus driver I know saved one morning because of a slippery bridge he crossed each winter. He never needed to load for years, and then one morning a truck lost traction and skidded toward the bus. The driver braked and swerved and kept the bus stable, and later he did not load, because the save had given him calm and that calm carried him through. He said the save helped even though he never used it, which tells me that safety can be a posture and not only a button. We do have buttons though, small and literal. A button sits on my desk that arms a save, and a button in my bag arms a load, though it will not fire without the right agreements. I do not stare at them all day, because that would be a thin way to live. I check them like I check my keys, and then I move into the day with my eyes up. You may laugh that I still lose my keys, and I promise you that I do. I have never loaded to find them, because I like the strange pride of finding them the ordinary way. In my city we joke that one take coffee tastes better than retry coffee. It is not a great joke, but it helps us keep our hands steady on the cup. Love grows wiser here, through a habit that may suit your world too. Before hard talks we ask, do you need me to be right or present? Most of the time the answer is present, and present people do not reach for resets. You might enjoy our small wedding ritual that many couples share. The couple writes 3 promises that they will not edit, and they speak them once without rehearsal, in ordinary words that they can keep. Then they keep a private safe for emergencies, and they lock it away unless a real danger comes. The ritual makes people cry in a way that does not bruise. I am not married, yet I keep those same kinds of promises with my friends. The promises say I will not reload away your worst moment, and I will not hide my worst one from you. Friendship here is not a perfect wall, it is a living fence that needs tending. I let friends see my weeds, and they let me see theirs. The weeds help us remember we are not printed, we are grown. That is how we keep our world gentle, while we handle a sharp tool. I want to touch briefly on faith, because faith always asks about time. In some circles, people say that a second chance is sacred when it comes as grace, and it is dangerous when it comes as control. I hold both ideas, and I try never to force grace into a gear. I also light a candle for people who needed a second chance they never had, and I donate tokens for those who cannot afford one in a season of danger. The donation fund is quiet and modest, which suits me, and it has saved lives without fanfare. If you visited, you would notice that many public places have small signs that say Fresh Zone. The signs remind you that in this space we live in one pass, like a park where you promise not to leave litter. I adore those spaces, because laughter there has a clean edge to it. If you and I could sit in such a park, I would bring 2 cups and the simple biscuits that everyone in my building claims to make best. I would ask you about your days without loads and what gives them shape. I would ask what you keep when you cannot return, and I would listen without plans to fix your answer. Listening without plans is my favorite and hardest skill. This letter is long because the subject deserves length, but I will not waste your attention. I will leave you with one more story, and then one more truth. The story is about a woman who worked the night shift at a small shop and felt lonely even when she sold milk and bread to warm people. She saved before a shift, and that night a kind customer talked to her and made her laugh in a way that changed her face. After the shift she did not load, even though she had the option to fix a few clumsy words she had said. She kept the clumsy words because they were honest, and she kept the laugh because it was not a performance. The next night the same customer returned, and the same woman found herself ready to meet a new friend without the shield of revision. The truth is simple and heavy. A life with loads still needs courage, and a life without loads still needs care. Courage and care make a life that is worth keeping, whether or not you can go back. I will keep one last secret in this letter and then open it for you. I saved before I began to write, because I feared I might say too much about my own heart. I will not load this time, even if I notice a sentence that could be smoother. I want you to have the letter that my first try wrote. Thank you for reading with the same patience that I needed to write. I trust your world to make its own rules about return and forgiveness, and the one step that becomes the next. I will end now in the way of letters in my neighborhood. With steady care and a hopeful wave, from your friend who lives in the world next to yours. Thank you for listening all the way to the end of my letter. If you enjoyed this, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a kind comment for me to read. If you wish to support this work, please use the QR code in the lower right of the video or the link in the description to donate. The description also has links to completely different series we make, and you might find a new favorite there. Take care until next time, and please come back for the next letter from my side of the worlds.